All right, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. This is Matt Gross, just showing you some of the interesting particulars going on with a possible upcoming storm for next week. And basically, what we want to go into here is why the GFS, the American model, is showing this at the surface, which is basically nothing for next Wednesday, and the European model is showing this, a 974 millibar bomb over Portland, Maine. This is a huge storm in the Euro. To back it up a little bit over the previous 24 hours before that, and you can see there's energy coming in from the west. Snows break out over Pennsylvania. Low starts forming somewhere off the New Jersey coast, rides straight over southern New England, and then kind of all comes together in this huge, would be a huge snowstorm for interior New York, northern New England, and much of Quebec. The GFS, on the other hand, if you look at the solution, doesn't really actually has this low going up into Quebec. It never has anything further to the south. Precipitation starts forming down here. I don't think this is a viable solution here, but that's just a major difference to have inside of 5 days. And as usual, when you have a disagreement like this, it all begins at the 500 millibar level. So this is the 500 millibar of the European model of today's 12Z run, and this is right here, switching now to the GFS, the 18Z run. It's going to use the most recent runs of each model. You can use whatever you want, though, because both models are generally telling the same story each run. So the key pieces there's actually several key pieces of energy. One is, the first I'm going to show you is going to be this guy right over here, coming into Western Canada over British Columbia and Saskatchewan. Another one we're going to talk about is this southern piece of energy. This becomes a critical low in the Atlantic when we get into later in the pattern. And then the third one is going to be the polar vortex coming down. It's not in the frame yet, but this is actually a polar vortex lobe that's been rotating around here on several of the models, but the key one is not coming into this picture yet on the GFS. But the first key piece of energy is this. This is on the GFS. Notice through hour 42 or 48 hours on the Euro, they look relatively similar. Slightly further south on the Euro, but overall, there's not much of a difference. As you roll it forward, we're going to start to notice some differences. So as we now move this forward out to day 3 on the Euro, it's going to be hour 72, you see they have broken apart. There is one piece over here over the northern plains moving into the Midwest, and another one way back over here over the northern Rockies on the Euro. Roll it forward on the GFS, it's also going to break apart. But what the GFS does is it creates a much stronger eastern piece. So here's the GFS. Here's the Euro at the same hour, and you can see you get these bright reddish-orange colors popping out on the GFS. So what this allows the GFS to do is it allows it to create a stronger storm over here, over Iowa and Wisconsin, and at the surface. This is going to allow a stronger low than you're going to get over here. Whereas the Euro has, it's got the energy there, but it's not going crazy with it. And if you want to look at the GFS specifically, go to the surface map right here. Same hour 66. You got a pretty vigorous clipper low here, 9,000 to 996, probably like 994, I'd guess, over northeast Iowa. Here, right there, and then switch to the 500 millibar, and boom, that's right where you got the energy. The Euro, at that same point, it's got a low there, but it's only 1,004 millibars. And that is where you start to have very, very important differences. Because in order for the low to be really, really strong when it gets over here, this piece has to be weaker, this initial piece, because it's this back piece that becomes the southern piece and needs to become the main area of focus if you want a really, really big storm. And that's sort of what you get with the Euros. Now, rolling that forward, here's the Euro now out to day 4. We're going to go out to hour 96. And you can see that by hour 96, that western piece has become pretty impressive on the southern end. It's become very, very large as it digs towards the Gulf. I'll go backwards again, back to day 3 so you can see it, and then watch this all reconnect by day 4. And now you've got, this piece is pretty vigorous. This is the initial piece is starting to get strung out, but it's not way ahead. And part of this polar vortex energy is now starting to phase in with a nice ridge out west. GFS does something quite different. If we roll this forward now, 24 hours, it's going to be out to 12Z on Tuesday. This is Tuesday morning. Look at the differences here. Again, rolling it back to 12Z on Monday. You started off with this, with our low over Iowa. Now you have this 12Z on Tuesday. Almost none of the same energy in the South. So again, the GFS concentrate on Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma. Look at this. GFS, Euro. Euro's got so much more energy on the Southern. And then the other arm you got, but this is the Euro's arm that's hanging out to the east. Look at how much further east this is than the GFS. So these are major, major differences between these two models. And that's basically, you know, the whole issue here is that does this lead energy get out ahead and become stronger and result in this? So you see now here's the GFS with that strong arm over Ohio and lower Ontario over Toronto, and that translates to a low over here on the surface. And then the Euro, if we run that forward to hour 96, well, it's got a low down here in Alabama. Now, the Euro still has this lead low because remember, even on the Euro, we had 1,004 millibars back here. So because of that, this clipper still has to roll through. See, back here, we still had a low over Iowa. So that just doesn't disappear, and that's part of the problem, which is kind of capping this setup. But because this energy is starting to bundle down near the Gulf Coast, Euro responds with a low down here, and that's very, very critical. Another very, very critical piece that you're going to notice here, if we're going to back this up again to day 3, looking on the surface map, is this low that the European has off Florida. Now notice, here's the European model. It's got a nice 1,004 millibar low here. And compare that to the GFS. Take 3, look at this. Same hour, 12Z on Monday. Look at this. Low is off Florida on the Euro. Low is almost to Bermuda on the GFS. This is another massive, massive difference. And the reason why this is important is this low on the Euro, if you run it forward, has the potential to become a 50-50 low up by Newfoundland. And the reason why that is significant is that you need some sort of blocking to prevent the low from cutting up into Quebec really, really quickly. And we don't have a block. We don't have a negative NAO. This is why you're not going to get a historical snowstorm, which you could have had if you had a negative NAO. But what you can get is a pseudo-block, or what is known as a 50-50 low, because it's near 50 degrees longitude and 50 degrees latitude out over here. And if you roll the European model forward, it's got a sizable low here southeast of New England by Tuesday, but then at the last second, it gets ripped apart into nothing. And the key with this, where it gets ripped apart, is that the low is here originally, so it's working. It's forcing this energy down to the south, because this low up here can't go straight up through Quebec when this is here. So it starts forcing the energy to the south, but it's a little bit too late because at the last second the low disappears, and then on the Euro, after it starts developing on the surface map, the low charges up into Quebec. And the reason why it's able to do that is because the other low is no longer there. That 50-50 low, that could have been the 50-50 low. But I can also tell you that if we go back to last night's Euro, there was I'll show the difference on the ensembles, because the ensembles are going to show the same thing, but there's going to be a difference there. So that's a secondary key. The third key, and this is something that's actually a bit of a surprise, as we run this out to day 5 now, the location of the polar vortex. And surprisingly, the GFS actually has a more favorable position for a big storm on the location of the polar vortex. Notice this is the GFS now. It's located basically over Michigan. It's down here, maybe over Lake Huron, but it's dug in. The problem is it's already created the low over here over Ontario and Quebec, so you're done. The setup screwed. It's over. But on the Euro, look at this is the same time frame. Again, 12Z on Wednesday. GFS. Euro's got it way back over here towards Lake Superior, and part of it, I mean, almost back into the western edge of Ontario and back toward Manitoba. This is a huge difference. Now, again, if the Euro's got the energy rounding the base of this trough down over here, this is from our storm that came up from the Gulf Coast, and I'll show that on the surface. See, there's our big storm in the Euro at hour 120 over southern New England. Yup, right out ahead of the southern end of this negatively tilted trough, so that checks out. But you have, if you had this with the polar vortex dug in here on the Euro, if you had this was in right on top of this, oh, bombs away. Now you've got a major, major scenario if that somehow dug in. So that's interesting that you actually have a component as large of a storm as the euro had. You actually have a component of the euro that was much less conducive to show a big solution than the GFS showed. So that's another thing that you're gonna have to watch on this. Now, yesterday at 12Z, the euro had the polar vortex down over the upper peninsula of Michigan at this point. Maybe not quite as far south as the GFS is shown here, but it was further south. Then last night it was even further north than this. It was probably up. It was up here. It was probably back over Manitoba at this point. Now today it's come back south a little bit, so that the euro is waffling on the exact location of the polar vortex. That's going to be key. Other thing we want to look at here are the ensembles. Now, here's something what I want to get into with that 50-50 low. So here are the ensembles. This is for 6Z Wednesday. So that's 1 a.m. Wednesday, very late Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, depending on which way you want to look at it. Here were the potential 50-50 lows. There was a few of them. There was one nice one down here, 984 millibars, a couple of 992, 998. But overall, not too much action going on over here. And in general, you can see this red designates pretty strong high pressure out over the Canadian Maritimes, out over here. So it's not really that much of a threat. And here's our storm. Euro doesn't really know where to put the lows, so it's probably in the process of transitioning. But that's basically a storm. Now look at this. Is going to be the same time frame on the 12Z ensembles, and the key is watch this area out over here. Whoops, I went to a different hour, so let me go back to hour. Here we go, 126. But now I'm going to try to go to the current euro. Way more lows out over in this area here, which means that low that we showed in the surface, again, last night, today, and response with more lows out here over today is you now also have more lows are redeveloping to the south off the Delmarva Peninsula before they go up into New England and bomb. Ideally, you'd want this even further south, but you can see how if you have more of a low out over here, this system is going to be forced to redevelop further to the south. And this going back to the surface low again, this storm, it's this storm that's off Florida on Monday and then rides up and out. The stronger this is, if this holds together, you're literally on Wednesday morning, you're going to have a low here over Newfoundland. That's where this low is going to be. This is going to be this, so if this low is up here, this low has to get forced further south at the base of the negatively tilted trough. And if you get all that, and if you get a polar vortex in this location, then you really have something. Probably won't happen that way because there's just too many factors that have to come together. But it just shows you why the ceiling on this event is very, very high. One other thing that is very, very quick, here's something the models all agree on. The air mass coming in behind this system is brutal. Now these are going to be wind chills that I'm going to pull up here. Again, not the actual temperature, wind chills, but look at this, -40s in Iowa and Minnesota on Wednesday morning, and here's the cold atmosphere, the whole air mass pouring in to the east. We'll run this now to Thursday morning. Look at these, now -50s in Minnesota and Iowa, -40s in Wisconsin, -50s in parts of Illinois. And now the atmosphere has started to invade the Northeast as well, -10s and 20s across New York and New England. And then if we run this into Friday morning as the air mass continues, it starts to moderate a bit out over here where the extreme cold is. But now you've got -30s showing up over in Pennsylvania and New York. So the whole Northeast, again, these are wind chills, not the actual temperature. But this is something the models do agree on. So at the very least, you've got bitter cold as the polar vortex invades next week. And you'll probably have a big storm somewhere. I don't know if it's going to be far enough south to get the population areas, but it's a highly interesting setup. All right, that's it for now. I'm Matt Gross, and I will see you on the page.